Thank you all for joining us this evening. Now let's turn it over to our presenter.
Hi, everybody. This is Dr. Agnew. I am the academic program coordinator for the PhD psychology program. And tonight I'm going to introduce our first speaker is Dr. Leilani Gelsted. She is head of Walden's Institutional Review Board, and you'll need to be working with them when you get into your dissertation research. She's been at Walden for about 20 years now, so congratulations. She is the first of our presenters. She's going to take about half the time, and then we're going to switch over to Dr. Morris and Dr. Taylor from the ORDS, who will talk about research methods. But first, Dr. Gelsted.
Hi, everyone. Next slide, please, Kayla. So today I'm going to be talking to you about some of the data collection timing concerns that every researcher runs into, especially when you're a doctoral student who's on a graduation time frame. So we recognize in working with our Walden researchers that most of you have, timeline goals for graduating. So you don't have an infinite amount of time for data collection. And so everything I talk about today is really going to be focused on helping to raise your awareness around those issues that could potentially delay your data collection and especially your recruitment. So here's some of the highlights of what I'm going to be talking about. And I also want to give you a heads up that we have a lot more information on the IRB website on each of these topics, including samples, videos, and other sorts of tools. So please stop by there sometime. And IRB also has a YouTube channel. I'm going to go ahead and put in the chat. I think this is the link to one of the videos that we posted that has a little bit of overlap with this session. It goes into just a little bit more detail than we'll have time for today. And you'll find other videos there that are explaining the IRB application process in excruciating detail for those of you who like that. And it also has a nice 2-minute overview for those of you who prefer to just kind of take it in at a high level and maybe wait till later to get into more details. Next slide, please. All right, so first, I'm really excited to share with you some results from an alumni survey we did earlier this year. We reached out to almost 1,000 alumni and asked them to share how long did their data collection take and how many people did they have to invite to get their sample size. And I have to say the results did not surprise me all that much. This did match what I had anecdotally been learning over my 20 years at Walden and literally thousands of studies that I've worked with students and faculty on. But we have hard data, now to share with you all, which I think really can help to set expectations. And, the better prepared you are, I think the more you can go into it. And to be very honest, one thing that I was seeing happen over and over again was that students would come into IRB office hours essentially distraught and heartbroken that they weren't getting the response rate they had hoped for with their volunteers. So let's just talk for a moment about the general time frame, and I'm going to talk a little bit more in a moment about response rates. So the good news is that a majority of students were able to complete their data collection in 11 weeks or less. Well, depending on what you consider majority, I guess you could almost say a majority completed their data collection within 7 weeks or less. But as you can see here from these figures, there's quite a bit of variation, and it's the very lucky, I would say few, about 35% who got their data collection done within 1 to 3 weeks. And anecdotally, I would say that would probably include, people who are interviewing a relatively small number of participants, or maybe doing a survey for which there are thousands and thousands of people who meet the inclusion criteria. And what we noticed as we were looking at, and people who took longer than 12 weeks, to be honest, that's when I start to get a little concerned, is if a student's data collection is taking longer than 12 weeks. And we found that those students often had to switch their recruitment tactics and either In fact, one of my grad assistants, I wonder if she's here today. Pamela, are you here? I didn't see her name. Maybe she's in the process of joining us. One of my grad assistants helped with this analysis. We looked at what were the reasons that students needed to update their data collection procedures after IRB approval. And the most common reason by far, about 10% of our students submitted some sort of change request related to changing their recruitment strategy. And I'm talking about 10% of students overall. Either needed to add a new source, like a new partner organization, or maybe they decided, hey, you know, just to round it out, I'm going to add a social media recruitment pathway. Or in many cases, they initially started with a very narrow geographical area and broadened that once they realized they couldn't get enough participants in a timely manner from their intended geographic area. So for example, you might have a student who started out saying, well, I'm going to interview teachers in Georgia. And then they, you know, the weeks are going by and they're like, you know what, this is taking a long time. I'm going to broaden it to Southeastern US because the issue that I'm interested in is relevant. Or they might have, in many cases, they go nationwide and said, you know what, why did I have that Georgia parameter on there in the first place? This is relevant for all teachers in the US. So I'm throwing it out there so you all consider as you're thinking about defining the scope of your study and setting your inclusion criteria. Just really carefully think about any parameters that you put in your data collection, whether it's geographical location, or maybe you say, I'm going to interview you know, executives with at least 10 years experience as executives. You might ask yourself, well, that's going to limit the pool. Do I really need to limit it to, you know, only those with 10 years, or would 2 years experience be enough to be in my study? Because if you think about it, like, you know, the broader your pool can be, the more swiftly you're going to be able to recruit the sample size that you need. As you can see here, the average was 6 weeks, which I think sounds very reasonable. And I hope that number kind of sticks with you. So as you are doing your planning for your, you know, graduation and your program, if you set in your mind, okay, it's going to take 6 weeks, and I'll just be one of those lucky ones. If it happens to go more quickly than that, great. But 6 weeks is a very reasonable expectation. Next slide, please. All right. So we also asked our alums, well, did you end up getting more volunteers than you expected or less? And 58% said they expected more volunteers than they actually got. Okay, so that to me is saying a majority of people had a bit of a shortfall in what they got for volunteers. And for me, having been in office hours and talked to literally hundreds of students who it always kills me because they're kind of brokenhearted. Like, I really thought I'd have more volunteers. It's not you. It's not personal. Think about it like this. If you're going to throw a party and, you know, you have 10 seats around the table, or 10, you know, you want 10 people, you're going to have to invite a lot more than 10 people to get 10 people to your party, right? You know, not everybody can come. You just got to plan for inviting a lot more than you actually need. Next slide, please. So for example, the response rate was very, it had a lot of variability. I was surprised that in this sample, there was one student, one alum who had 100% response rate. But then when I dug a little deeper, I saw that that alum was actually doing a case study. And the reason they had 100% response rate is that there was a multiple case study, and the people they were interviewing were also the leaders at the organizations who had already agreed to be the cases in the case studies. So that's kind of an unusual example. And they were also going on site to recruit their interviewees. And then I also saw that there was a student who had a 2% response rate, and she needed a sample size of 7 and had to invite 350 people in order to get a volunteer. Now that's extremely low. Unfortunately, I can't remember what the deal was with that. I have a feeling it was very, very kind of narrow inclusion criteria, and probably a study that had a high time demand. So just bear in mind when you're seeking volunteers, it's really important. For example, when you're doing maybe a practice interview with your classmate or your friend, to get an accurate time estimate. And if your practice interview is taking more than 30 or 40 minutes, you really need to think carefully about, do I really need to be asking all of these questions? Because most people, 30 minutes is what I think a lot of people are willing to share. And even asking people to give up an hour of their time, it's a lot. So yeah, I notice anecdotally that people just have a really hard time getting volunteers when their study takes more than 45 minutes or so. Next slide, please. And I see some questions in the chat. We'll try to get to those toward the end. And I just want to say real quick, if you have a very kind of involved question, I would really encourage you to come to IRB office hours. We offer those every weekday with a few exceptions if people are out of the office. But if you look on the IRB website, we have time slots. It's group advising, so you don't have to make an appointment, and you can drop by and ask questions. I host those, or the manager of our department hosts when I'm not available. So if you have a very involved question, that's a good place to follow up with that. So let's look a little bit more closely at the volunteer rates. So if I know this is kind of small, but if you just look at it, in a general way, you can see the first bar is by far the tallest. So that's representing the most common experience for researchers is to have under a 25% volunteer rate. So what does that mean? That means that for most of the people who are here today, I would say, or the most common experience that you will have as a researcher is that if you needed 25 volunteers, you would need to invite 100 people who meet the inclusion criteria. And I know if, for example, a lot of you are doing qualitative studies, and for whatever reason, the magic number range often it's 10 to 12 volunteers. And then of course you wait and see how long it takes you to meet saturation. But so just to have a benchmark for you to be thinking about, okay, how large of a pool am I going to need to identify? If you need 12 volunteers, that means you're going to have to invite at least 50 people who meet the inclusion criteria. And what happens a lot is that I talk to students who say, well, I'm going to invite teachers at, let's say, math teachers in middle school. And the school that I'm planning on, partnering with has, 15 teachers who meet the inclusion criteria. And then that makes me nervous, because if you need 12 volunteers and there are only 15 people who meet the inclusion criteria, that means you're expecting, like 80-something% response rate. That's very unrealistic. If you needed 12 volunteers, you need to have a pool of at least 50 people who meet the inclusion criteria. So I hope that's helpful. We're going to continue occasionally to survey our alums. And so some of you in the future might get an invitation to give us feedback on what your experience was like, because this data does reflect how things went during the pandemic. So bear that in mind, please. Next slide, please. All right, so here's a few tips, and everything I talk about for the rest of this presentation is covered in more detail at that link I put above in the YouTube video. So I'm just going to give you the highlights now of the best practices to try to maximize your response rate. And I'm going to try to keep an eye on the time, because we have some other good content coming from the other two professors who are going to be sharing some information. So when it comes to your recruitment process, your flyer or your email, again, these are just tips. Make sure you use bullets. Do not do your invitation in long paragraphs. People's attention span is so short these days, and we all skim really quickly, whether that invitation is coming in an email or if it's flashing by and someone's scrolling in social media. You need to be very concise and use very short phrases, bullets. Set the tone that you're going to honor their time. That's another gift. Time is everybody's most precious commodity nowadays, more than ever, I think. Also, be sure that in your invitation somewhere, you state the time frame for data collection. So for example, if I just got IRB approval and, I might say, collecting data in the month of December, just something, or if it's coming in an email invitation, you could say the survey's open for 2 weeks. That type of information lets the participants or the invitees know that, maybe they're thinking, oh, that sounds interesting. Maybe I'll volunteer after the holidays. No, you do want them to have a little bit of sense of urgency, because a lot of studies out there that are not done by doctoral students have a year of data collection, and it's not that unusual for a study to be open for 6 to 12 months. Most doctoral students don't want to be in that predicament. So just make sure you're really clear about what your desired time frame is, and be concise about it. Like you can see in these examples here. Here are some examples that I would recommend, maybe in a subject line or as a flyer headline. Anytime you do whether it's in social media or if you're going to hang an old school flyer, you should have some sort of headline to grab people's attention. So here are some examples, 20-minute anonymous survey on parent stress, $5 Amazon gift card open for 2 weeks. Even that's a little bit wordy, but those are the essential points that I think you want to come across. I would actually like that a little better in bullets. Or something like seeking math teachers for 1-hour phone interview in next 2 weeks, $10 gift card. Just the essential information. Let's see. Next slide, please. All right. So in terms of getting flyers out there, I know a lot of us sometimes intuitively think, okay, well, I'm going to get my hands on a contact list, and that way, I can manage the invitations and maybe send out a reminder. Sure, that works sometimes, but more and more, we're finding that organizations are reluctant to share the contact information of their employees or their clients because of people getting spammed. And honestly, people getting kind of upset about the contact information getting shared. Plus, if you're running a company, you don't exactly want your employees to be getting constant distractions. So more and more, we're finding that organizations don't want to do that. However, they sometimes are willing to forward your invitation to the people who meet the inclusion criteria. And so that's, I would say, the preferred approach. But like I said, if they're willing to share the contact information, that's all right. You can take that route. If they're going to share contact information, you're going to need a formal letter of cooperation. However, if they're just going to forward the invitation on your behalf, then you don't need a letter of cooperation. And I think in a lot of cases for doctoral students, that's the preferred route, because getting a signature on a letter of cooperation, it takes more time than you would think. It's often not as simple as just popping by someone's office and getting a signature, because sometimes they say, oh, I better get legal to look at this, or, I better get HR to look at it. And then all of a sudden it just becomes this decision by committee that takes weeks or months. So I recommend the approach of having your invitation be forwarded over you asking for contact information for that reason. And then, like I mentioned before, it's pretty important what the subject line, how that's worded. The worst thing I can think of, honestly, is a well-meaning person. Let's say you're going to, work with the HR contact at a company, and they're willing to send out the flyer, and they just put in the subject line opportunity and nothing else, or even just something vague like research study. I mean, a lot of people are just going to scroll right past that and say that doesn't sound important. It doesn't sound like something I have to do. But if you use one of the subject lines, like the examples in the last slide, I think it's more likely that people would click on it and actually read through it. And this is just having talked to, hundreds of students who were having challenges with recruitment. Next slide, please. Okay, and here's some more specific information. And again, this is a lot, but there's more detail in the YouTube video, the link that I posted above. It's really important to put a careful thought into your flyer. Like many things in life, you only get one chance to make a first impression. And so I can't stress how important it is that your flyer be free of typos and look very professional, and do a little bit of a sales job. You want people to think, this is an opportunity I don't want to miss out on, to share my voice, to share my point of view. And so we do on the website, I will grab the link in just a moment. We have some samples of flyers, both in social media format, email format, or old school paper format, like you might hang in a coffee shop or on a bulletin board. And so you're not required to use our samples. We just provide them because some people, I think, get stuck. And unfortunately, I think a lot of people get really wordy once they start writing. Their flyers get really wordy, and I strongly discourage you from having a long flyer. It's just you lose people, unfortunately. And think kind of like a marketing person. Like you just really want people as they're scrolling, on social media, or as they're looking through their email inbox, you probably have anywhere from a half a second to 3 or 4 seconds to attract their attention and hold it. And if you lose them, you lose them, and you're probably not going to get them back. So, that's why these first impressions are so important. One really common oversight that I see all the time is the second bullet here, the second from the end bullet on the left side. I see that a lot of students just say in their flyer, study, seeking, nurses who worked in the ER. And it just says study without saying what kind of study. So for all these nurses know, you maybe want to do blood draws, or, have them go sit in an MRI machine or something. So it's really, really important to say survey study or anonymous surveys. I mean, just try to convey information concisely and clearly so that people can think. You want them to think, oh, I could do that. That'll only take a few minutes. Or it's really encouraged that you use a headline or maybe a question as your headline. Have you ever wanted to share your views about parents' roles in the schools? Just something compelling that would make people want to click on it or want to take those steps to volunteer. And then a couple don'ts are, make sure that when you're doing your flyer or your invitation email, bear in mind who you're talking to. You're not talking to your committee. You want to make sure your language is audience appropriate, and yet, professional. And it's been a little while since I saw a really bad one, but sometimes I've seen invitations that were, please help me, it may be genuine, but it doesn't come across as very professional. And then, you don't want people to volunteer because they feel sorry for you. You want people to volunteer because they, care about this research question that you're trying to address. And then also the final point on here is that, if you're in a position of authority, then, let's say you are allowed to, collect data in some places where maybe you're known as a colleague. But if you're in a position of authority, you really need to separate it from your, if you were the principal at a school, for example, or if you were, the director of education at a hospital. You need to neutralize your authority and make sure it's clear that this is for your doctoral study, so that there's some separation between your professional role and your doctoral student role. And the next slide is my last slide, I believe. So a couple other things about the distribution of the flyer or the email. You want to really think about, you're welcome to use a partner organization if you have some contacts. Don't underestimate the power of social media, LinkedIn, Facebook. I just learned pretty recently that Reddit has I think a psychology studies Reddit group, and people have gotten hundreds or thousands of volunteers through Reddit. So, I'm going to add that to this slide for the future. So you are allowed to reach out to people whose contact information is public. And so, for example, teachers at schools. Teachers, I've yet to run into a school where the teachers' email addresses were not public. So if you are wanting to interview teachers, you don't have to get the school's permission to do that because their teachers' contact information is public. So be thinking about maybe what approaches you could use. You don't want to become a spammer. You're not trying to make money off of this study, but you need to bear in mind that people may wonder, how did you get my contact information? So that's something you might want to clarify if it isn't clear. Also, you're allowed to use your professional network, and you're allowed to ask your people in your network to forward your invitation. That's called snowball sampling. You need to be a little bit careful and make sure that you don't have people recruiting their subordinates, because that would get into an ethically questionable dynamic there. We also have the Walden participant pool, which is fellow students, and that's not appropriate for every study, like more sensitive studies about mental disorders or about criminal behavior. It's for non-sensitive studies. But if you did want to interview or survey fellow teachers or clinicians, the participant pool is a great way to access those. And you can just Google Walden participant pool and take a look at the types of studies that are posted there, or better yet, go volunteer for some of your fellow students' studies. They would really, really appreciate it. I try to go in there and volunteer for a study whenever I have some time to do that. And then some things that I just want to highlight. One of the things you really should be careful of. Do not send large batch email invitations. Those tend to get blocked by most organizations like schools or businesses. If they see anyone sending large batches, so meaning putting lots of people in the subject line, they tend to intercept those because they view those as spam or junk. And I've had more than one student say, yeah, I was just sending out invitations and not getting any responses. And then I finally figured out that it was being intercepted. So I know it sounds tedious, but you do have to send out invitations one at a time if you've got their contact information rather than doing large batch or BCCs. And also don't send attachments. That sometimes gets them flagged as well, even if they're, whatever you're sending, you should just include it in the body of the email instead of as an attachment. And then I believe they said I have one more slide. Yes, okay, let's see. When it comes to data collection format, let's take interviews, for example. Face-to-face is ideal. The pandemic sure put a wrench in that. And Zoom is great for a lot of populations, especially professionals who are used to using Zoom. But just, again, know your audience. Not everybody is comfortable. If I try to Zoom with my dad, I'm looking up his nose the entire time. So he just still can't really do Zoom very well. And you want to, if you give people the flexibility, you're going to get a better response rate, because also bear in mind, if you insist on meeting with them in person, that means they have to have childcare or it not, interfere with their work schedule, because anytime they're spending with you to do the study, they're not spending time with their family or on their job or on whatever their projects are. So phone options let people multitask while they talk to you. And I've done some interviews while people are out walking or doing their dishes or even, driving their car or something like that. And I think a lot of us, when you're collecting data, you take what you can get and you try to fit into people's schedules the best you can. In order to have enough time for all the content that the next two presenters are going to share, I'm going to just respond to some of the questions in the chat, and then we could see if there's time at the end to talk about some of those questions.
Awesome. So I think we can actually go ahead. We can go with one question right now, which may be a question that others may have as well. And then we could continue on those questions. So everyone, if you continue to have questions, feel free to continue to put those in the chat and we'll come to those towards the end. So the question right now that we have is, does Walden have a survey tool we can use for a screening tool?
Oh, I'm sorry, we don't. And but there are free versions. Google Forms is free, and there's a free version of SurveyMonkey. So you're welcome to explore those.
Awesome, thank you. Now we will move in to our next presentation.
Our next two presenters are going to be Dr. Morris from the Office of Research and Doctoral Services. He is an academic success coordinator specializing in qualitative methodology and has been at Walden for 13 years. And he works with Dr. Taylor, another academic success coordinator at ORDS, focusing on quantitative methodology. He's been here for 15 years. So with that, Dr. Morris, Dr. Taylor, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, John. Next slide, please. Yes, good evening, and thank you for taking your time out this evening. But I think it's very valuable time because you're being acclimated to the Office of Research and Doctoral Services, which is really the hub what I like to call it, of your success of actually completing that dissertation. And this is where, you know, a lot of your services and documents and support systems for specifically your research is housed. And I'll just simply, you know, just mention some of these. I'm not going to read the slides here to you, but you can see we have Student Research Administration. You know, and Tony's really big, you know, anything on in that Mighty R system, a lot of that technology stuff, you know, Tony is the man there. Research Quality Management and Support, Deborah Inman, my boss, Morris's boss. And as it says, quality research, everything under the realm of quality research. That means the research courses, the curriculum. We are very instrumental in managing those courses. You know, instrumental in writing those research courses, those ones that you actually take. Curriculum development. And then we have student research advising services, which we'll talk about a little bit more. Dr. Leilani just talked about the ethics and the IRB. We have research-sponsored programs, for example, grants that individuals, faculty can write, you know, to further their research. Academic research. Again, we have journals. And I strongly encourage you as a Walden, when you graduate and your dissertation is complete, to look into our Walden academic journals, perhaps for your first publication, if you haven't published already. So again, that's the Academic Research and Scholarship. Those writing folks, the form and style. Recently, about within the past year, they kind of moved from the Writing Center up under the ORDS organization, again, because that's a research quality component, you know, of your doctoral journey. So the form and style folks are housed in our department also. And then, you know, committee support and general doctoral support is another one of our offices. And you can read this slide and see what the, you know, the specific services are. But more so, when you go into our website for the Office of Research and Doctoral Services, you will be able to click on the specific pages and see all the detailed information for these wonderful services for you. Next slide. Okay, yeah, here we have, again, just the form and style services. And again, I strongly encourage you to take advantage of this. And one of the things I like to say is that when we meet with students, and I could say at least 1,000 a year I might meet with, Morris perhaps the same. But one of the things that we find is that when we meet with students, you know, for their research appointments to talk about their ideas, their topic or data analysis, we're finding that a lot of times there are struggles with the resources and where they are and what resources you have for you. I'll just point out one, for example, the chapter edits. You know, that's a service that when you're writing a dissertation, that you can send that to the Writing Center or to the editors, and they can edit that document for you for free. I believe it's 3 or 4 chapters that they will edit, you know, a certain amount of time. Why wouldn't you want to take advantage of something like that? Why would you go out and pay an editor? So again, it's very critical to understand your resources and how to get to them. You'll see your capstone templates there. Don't go through all the hard work of trying to align a Word document with all the margins and things that go into the APA's form and style, because all that stuff's done for you. Okay, so visit that website and see what's available there for you to make your journey a lot easier. Next slide. And here we will just talk briefly about our methodology advising services. And I would think that this is probably where Morris and I, Dr. Morris, spend a great deal of our time. And the first one I'll talk about is the research design alignment advising. This is where we work with students on their basically research design alignment to get them on the right path to ensure that the study is feasible, it's aligned well, it's addressing a significant problem, and all of those very broad research components that really need to be, you know, in place. And also we have the quantitative statistics and SPSS advising. Now, this is where a student will come to us for advising when they have collected their data and they need to learn something about SPSS, how to import that data, perhaps from one of those services, a SurveyMonkey, how to run the analysis, how to interpret the analysis, etc. So all of these services are available at our website. I'll let Morris go ahead and just talk briefly about the qualitative components of our advising services.
Right. Thank you, Reggie. Thank you, Dr. Reggie. And everyone, and thank you for Dr. Agnew and Dr. Sickle for inviting us to this webinar. Happy to join you today, and it gives us a chance to introduce you to some of the services that we offer and share some of the new resources, especially research resources that have been made accessible and available to you. So in terms of qualitative methodology advising, so this is one-on-one 40 minutes individual sessions with anybody who wants advice, consultation on selection of a research design in qualitative research, data collection, and then data analysis. As Dr. Reggie explained, research design alignment advising, we have 4 methodology advisors who are handling these appointments. For the qualitative one, I'm the only one currently. So my schedule is pretty booked, but again, if you submit a request, I'm happy to accommodate you and find and open an additional time slot in case you need any help with that. And just like Dr. Gjelstad mentioned with the IRB office hours, we also have qualitative methodology office hours. Dr. Meredith Spillett offers them every week, either on Tuesday or Thursday, and mine are typically on Friday, every Friday. And it's kind of a group advising, and it's a very interesting format because it's kind of a questions and answers, but students at different stages of their dissertation research, they come to us. So it's kind of a dialogue. It's like peer-to-peer, also mentoring. The students are exchanging experiences and advice with each other. And it's also, again, I invite you to take advantage of this service. You don't have to schedule an appointment in advance. So during this hour, or sometimes it goes up to 90 minutes, you're welcome to drop by anytime during this period, and again, to engage with other colleagues, and then I'm trying to assist you as much as I can with qualitative methodology questions. And Reggie, you have something similar on the quantitative methodology office hours, right?
Yes, the quantitative methodology advising is the same, format that Dr. Morris just mentioned again. And this is where individuals can click on the schedule and see when a session is going on and chime in and get in. And it's, again, that group session. What I like to mention about that is that, we try to have these services that complement each other. So, for example, I will see sometimes an appointment pop up for the research design alignment appointment. And it's something the student may say, I just want to know something about, calculating a sample size, or something that really the student shouldn't have to wait, or should not wait, say 2 weeks for an appointment with me or with Morris or anybody. But we have these the office hours, which are several of them throughout the week. So just click on one of those, go into that session and ask your question. So if you really learn what these services are geared toward and how to use a combination of them, I think you can see that a lot of your needs can be met. For example, that immediate need. I want to go into an office hour session this afternoon or tomorrow to get a question answered. I've got a broader topic that I really want to sit down with someone one-on-one. I can schedule that a week or 2 down the line. So really understand how these services are kind of put together to complement each other. And then the final one on this slide is one of the chief academic officers abstract review authorities. We also have an abstract review appointment. Now, this is when you're in those very final stages and that abstract is ready to get looked at and you're ready to submit it into TaskStream. And we know we don't want that thing to be sitting there and going through review after review after review. This is the last document, the last signature we need. Well, some of the programs offer an abstract review process where you can send that to that person that's designated for your program. Now, I'm not the School of Psychology designee, but you can send it to that person, and that person can look at it, provide you some comments, etc., and send it back, so that when you do submit the official one, you're going to be submitting it again to that same person that's your approval authority that has just commented on it. It just increases the chances tenfold of you getting that approval at the first submission. Thank you. Next slide. Now, as Morris mentioned when we started, our new resources, this is our very, very new resource. Starting last term, we partnered with our Academic Skills Center folks, the folks that provided research course support. In other words, there were live sessions, SPSS quantitative sessions, each week aligned with the research course curriculum. Like, for example, right before I got on this call tonight, I did a session on multiple linear regression. And it was aligned with the week 2 for the advanced statistics course. So we have just offered this service. Now, when you go out to our website, you'll see that it's kind of 2 categories. The research courses, which align with the assignments for each week. Live sessions, just-in-time delivery for your needed instruction. Now, we know there's a host of other quantitative concepts that span well beyond our research courses, but we need to understand when we delve into our research. And I'm now holding these quantitative seminars, which don't necessarily fit a pattern of aligning with the research course curriculum. Just kind of like, for example, role of theory and quantitative research is the next one that will be held tomorrow night. Now, when you go out to our website, you'll see it's updated, and this is a place that you can come and see what the upcoming seminars are and all the seminars that have been conducted. We have the links to the live recordings of those sessions. So again, you can pull up one of those recordings. Like, for example, I did one on research design alignment with the intent of you not having to wait 2 to 3 weeks to get an appointment with me, but take a look at this on demand, ready for you at any time seminar that pretty much encapsulates everything that I would possibly talk to you about in your research design alignment appointment, but even more in depth. So again, trying to complement everything else that we do. So that's the very new resource. And if I were you and I'm contemplating the quantitative agenda or anywhere involved in anything quantitative, a course, or contemplating research, please look at the list of these seminars, and I'll guarantee you it will be very, very, very beneficial for you and save you a lot of headache and frustration. I see Cheryl mentioned how anxiety level went down from 100 to 50. That's what all of our resources and services are designed to do, to take that anxiety level down, to help educate you into the techniques and concepts that you need to understand to accomplish, your mission. And that's why we exist. So take advantage of us. Next slide. And great, Morris, I'll let you talk about this one.
Yeah, and that's another brand new resource. So we have wealth of research resources on our website. And this web page has been recently redesigned. And I bring your attention to the icon, the button on the right-hand corner, the top one. Next slide, please. If you click on this one, it will bring you to the new self-paced research skills modules. And some of them they have just completed. And Dr. Reggie Taylor and we worked collaboratively with several faculty from psychology, actually, to develop these introductory skills modules, and they're very, very accessible, very friendly. The first one, for example, it's kind of presents general introduction to research, and they are accessible to you at any time, before your coursework, during your coursework, after coursework, during the capstone, if you need some kind of refresher. So the first one briefly introduces what is the purpose of research. Right? Why do we get involved in research in the first place? What is the importance of research to your specific discipline or field of study? How research contributes to positive social change? The second one is more on the how to develop like a research mindset. What are the critical thinking skills, logical reasoning skills, and then communication skills required to conduct research? And of course, a distinction is made between qualitative and quantitative approaches, a kind of deductive and inductive and abductive logic in association with either qualitative approach or quantitative approach. The third one is mostly introduction to research terminology. What are the main research concepts that you have to be familiar with, like research paradigms, frameworks, philosophy of science, and the main assumptions like ontology, epistemology, and then some practical terms like what is population, what is a sample, what does it mean to establish a sample size, hypotheses, variables, and then a little bit more information about measurement and statistics. And then the fourth module is basically, again, a very practical introduction to scholarly sources. Let's say, what is the difference between scholarly and non-scholarly sources? What is the role of scholarly literature in the research process? What are the common sections, for example, in a peer-reviewed journal article? So pretty much that would help you with your chapter 2, literature review, how to conduct it, how to select peer-reviewed journal articles, and how to critically analyze them. And the fifth module is pretty much focusing on the iterative process of research, introduction to the main components of a doctoral research study, what makes it grounded in the literature, what makes it feasible, for example, the feasibility criteria, and then original research. What is the distinction between social problem and research problem, for example, and then what are the quality criteria of those research problem. And as Dr. Reggie Taylor mentioned, a very critical point, how to ensure alignment among those research components. So those are the first 5 introductory modules. They're pretty short. You can take them probably each one of them about 15-20 minutes. Now, we've been working also on several longer self-paced, self-learning modules, and 2 of them are qualitative and 1 is quantitative. Just to briefly introduce you to the one on interviewing. So very interesting module, and again, I invite you to check it out. Even if you want, you can check certain section of this module because it's a longer one, but it introduces research interviewing as what is the difference between research interviewing and then other types of interviewing, like job interviewing, clinical interviewing. What are the different forms of interviews, like structured, semi-structured, unstructured? How to structure an interview guide or interview protocol? What are the different interview strategies? What is the difference between synchronous interviews and, as Dr. Lewani just mentioned, to ensure flexibility, you can use different modalities of synchronous interviews, like face-to-face, video conference, telephone interviews, but also a newly emergent mode of interviewing, like asynchronous interview, like email interviews. Of course, there are limitations to each one of those formats, but again, it gives you a sense of what is available and how you can use it. And there's also some practice interviewing simulation. You can actually simulate a practice interview, which is would be very helpful. And then another section of this module focuses on focus group interviewing, which has its own specifics. It's a little bit more complicated and demanding, but we'll have a chance to talk more about that. Something that will be touched upon also during residencies. And then what are the criteria for evaluating interviews? And then some transcription choices. If you have conducted interviews, what are some choices available to you, either internet services or even using Word or different dictation and transcription software programs. So it gives you like a decision tree, how you can do that. And currently the qualitative data analysis module is under development. It will be available pretty soon, but again, I'm excited about this module because it gives like a very good introduction into coding, how to approach coding, what are the different types of coding, like attribute coding, magnitude coding, open coding, things like that. Then how to categorize data, creating categories, how to move them to thematic analysis, develop themes, and then how to interpret results of qualitative data analysis, and then how to present the findings. So currently, Dr. Susan Marcus, again, from the Grad School of Psychology, is working as a subject matter expert on that. It will be pretty soon available. And there's another module on SPSS. Reggie, you want to say a few words about this module?
Yes, yeah. The SPSS module again is just as it states, getting started with SPSS, and again getting into the very basics. What we have learned, with this new thought process about our research courses, is that we kind of think that we hit the ground running and we start saying, let's run this test and descriptive statistics and let's do this. But the students, especially from these seminars that I'm conducting, when they complete the surveys, they're saying, this was fantastic what you gave us, but can you even start back a little bit even more basic? And I'm like, wow, okay. Even things like I started about with, how to start using some of the basic procedures, but students were going as far as how do we get this thing loaded, on our computer? When I, just really start to think from the perspective of a student looking at this from the first time, and stop thinking that they know this and they've seen this, and when they're clicking buttons, they understand what they're doing. So I think you'll see from all these new research skill modules, we really started thinking about the affective component too, and how you feel about learning it, and the way that this stuff is presented. You'll see these modules a story. It's very different from our traditional textbook and read these journal articles and answer these discussion questions. It's a very different way that we are really, really doing things now overall, with our research skills here at Walden. And I think you really, really enjoy it. The technical folks, our PSID teams, the folks that are putting all these videos and movies and animations and avatars and things together. It's just going to be amazing and hopefully a much more enriching experience in making this quantitative paradigm a little bit less apprehensive for anyone, no matter if you're taking a course or going to embark upon that in your final capstone project. Thank you.
Next slide, please. Yeah. And just one, but perhaps most of you are familiar with this web page. It's called the study hall. It's like a hub for course learning resources. So if you've already finished your coursework and you have to revisit any of the resources that were presented in those courses, everything from the research course sequence is collected in this study hall. And it's available, you have free access to it on the website. If you ask for credentials, you can reach out to Dr. Reggie Taylor, but to give you a secret, both the ID and the password is research or RSCH, and you can get into the study hall. The materials from the introductory course, Research 8110, also to the quantitative courses, 8210 and 8260, the two qualitative courses, 8310 and 8360, and also the mixed method course. All the most essential guides and also media resources are available on this webpage in the study hall. And next slide. And this is just another screenshot of the resources that are available, how you can access them. If you click on the left side, this tab at the top, developing research, and next slide, you'll see all those various collections, clusters of resources that you can access, how to develop, how to identify a research problem, how to select a research design. Also, interestingly, if you go to collect and manage data, You have access also on preview of quantitative and qualitative data analysis software programs. And then you have tutorials if you click on Establish a Research Design. Again, very concise, very helpful introduction to various quantitative and qualitative research design. And again, I invite you check out the website, click on each one of those collections, and all those resources are made freely available to you at any time when you need it. Okay. Thank you.
All right, it looks like everyone has been asking questions throughout the chat, but it also looks like our presenters have been answering most of those questions. Are there any questions that the presenters would like to maybe reiterate to everyone? Maybe they thought they were a really great question. In addition, everyone feel free to add more questions and we can go ahead and take those as they come.
I'd love to underscore, I mean, I responded to all of the questions in the chat, and thank you. Those were some really good questions. So Aga had asked about, working with a partner organization that maybe has their own IRB. And just for anyone who might be in that situation, those types of organizations would be hospitals, universities, military units. They have their own IRB systems, and you can pursue the approvals in whichever order you prefer. It can work either way, with them going first or us going first. But so, a couple of people have commented as well that hospitals, unfortunately, the lawyers almost always get involved and they don't tend to work very swiftly. And so I think you might want to take a look at the video. I posted the link above that is covers how to think through the decision of whether you really need a partner organization, because not everyone does. And frankly, sometimes it slows the research down and narrows, the scope of your study in a way that makes it less publishable. So it's all right to use a partner organization if that's how you were planning to do it. But this would be a good time to think very broadly. Do you even need a partner organization? Could you use your professional network and social media like LinkedIn and Reddit and other types of professional organizations to get your invitation out there in front of people who meet the inclusion criteria, because those might end up being more streamlined for you. And then there was quite a lot of buzz in the chat about Mechanical Turk and Prolific. I don't particularly endorse any one of those. They cost money. And so I like to encourage students to look for the options that don't cost any money. But if you're kind of in a situation where you just want to get it done quickly and you don't mind spending the money, I know of someone who recently got their participant, their sample size in less than a week for $3 per participant. Prolific located those participants because people had signed up with them. Mechanical Turk kind of works the same way. There are a lot of, if you just Google finding survey participants or finding interview participants, a lot of it was built for marketing research. So bear that in mind. And it's probably not going to work that well for you if you have very specific inclusion criteria. But the person I know who only spent $3 per participant was just looking for adults who work. So that's so broad. And, obviously there are millions of those in this world. And she was able to get an international sample very quickly.
Well, Lonnie, if I could add something,
please.
In your presentation, you're really focusing on, pitfalls and saving time and things like that. I'd like to share something. You mentioned, organizations. One of the organizations too are schools. And I'll share a story with you. I did mine with the Department of Defense school system. And of course, they had an IRB. Oh my gosh, a very strict IRB process. And however, when I found out about that, I contacted Dodds in Washington, D.C. I told them what I was doing, what I wanted to do, and they were like, fine, that's fantastic. However, our IRB meets twice a year.
Great point.
Okay? So keep that in mind. So now, and I had gotten in touch with them about 2 weeks after the last IRB meeting.
Oh.
So, I had to wait. So I'm just saying, keep these things in mind as you think throughout this process. So yes, that's a great question about the other IRB, but understand their process also. Now, Leilani and her folks are not going to make you wait 6 months, but
No.
we're not under the purview of other folks' IRB processes. So please keep that in mind as you move forward. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. That's a great point. Walden's IRB meets every week. And other IRBs in school systems or in universities or hospitals, they often meet only once a month, or like the one Dr. Taylor just mentioned, maybe twice a year. So you have to really plan ahead, and you can pursue those while you're still working on the proposal. You just have to find out what the process is, pretty far in advance so you can plan.
Awesome. Again, it
We'll
looks like
share our B story, Lenali, another time. Remember you and I at the graduation on stage, and I was telling about my horrible IRB story.
Yeah, that was, yes. When Dr. Taylor was a student at Walden, probably I was new too, so it was probably about 20 years ago, right?
Yeah, we'll just share this for some humor. We were on stage, and I was a new student, and they wanted me to talk about my experience. And I said, "Oh, the IRB, and they wouldn't let me do this, and they wouldn't let me do that." And I started talking about the specifics of the study. Now, this panel is on stage, and Leilani is sitting right next to me. And I don't know her yet. She doesn't know me. And she looked at me and she said, "Was that you?" And I looked at her and I said, "Was that you?" And we just started laughing because we just had this interaction, with my IRB application and things. But yeah, very funny. So yeah, but it's a very critical step in the process. So we just want to make sure you're aware of a lot of the pitfalls and things that may come your way. You can write this brilliant proposal and get stuck, having challenges getting that data.
Exactly. And actually that issue is relevant. So I'll just mention it real quick. I remembered that, and this really dates us, okay? Because I remember Dr. Taylor wanted to do a drawing for an iPod. You remember those?
Exactly.
He wanted to do an iPod drawing, and we said, and this was the policy at the time when we were under laureate, that drawings were not permitted. I've actually been making some headway. I believe our new university network may be more open to allowing drawings. And so we're working on that. By drawings, I mean, doing telling people if you participate, you can be entered in a drawing to get this prize. Our old system did not allow that. We instead would have said, no, you just, rather than giving one person an iPod, why don't you just give everybody $5 or, whatever amount you decide. But in many cases, a lot of creativity has come up in terms of folks who say, here are a few charities. I'll donate $10 to the charity of your choice. And that's been a very compelling or let's say you need 600 participants or something like that, you could say, I'll donate $2 for every volunteer, to one of these charities that's related to the topic. Not everyone can spend $10 or $20 a participant, but just for a point of reference, when you're doing interviews, because usually that's more time, usually once you do the consent process and the interview itself, it's at least 30 to 60 minutes. The typical, I would say the going rate, if you will, it's not a requirement, but just what's considered standard is about $20, like a gift card. I think what's most common is a gift card to Visa, or some people like to do Starbucks or Target or Walmart or something like that. People really appreciate gas cards, but you're not required. You can make it $5 if you want. It's just, you just have to weigh how urgent your data collection process is for you.
Exactly. And one of the lessons learned from that was I was really trying to use that iPod, to boost my participation. And, that can be considered coercion, And so, Leilani and I was going back through that. And so I hadn't even narrowed it down to, I think they had the little iPod shuffles at the time, which were like $20. And so she was still, no. And so anyway, to make a long story short, she was the IRB police. And so she, got me in order. But, what I did was I went back to the school. She said, this was after the fact. I thanked them. and I went back to the school and I actually donated, a computer because it was a career development study and set up a career development center for them. And then I did a raffle afterwards, you know. But this
Nice.
had nothing to do with the study. They did not
Just as
know
a
this was coming
general,
or
yeah.
anything. But it was just I was so thankful that they, worked with me to get the data, and I really thought I owed them that. And I did that after, I couldn't do anything, and and the point taken was that when I did the raffles, I was walking out the building that day to get back on my plane, and one of the little kids in the 8th grade, he looked at me. He said, "Man," he said, "I volunteered in this study because I wanted to win that iPod." And so that really brought the message home that, perhaps I wouldn't get the responses that I wanted either. Would my data be valid and reliable? Because this kid may just sit down and say, oh, let me just check off all these responses just to get my name in the drawing. So these are what I call the pragmatics of research also too, that you need to think about, when you're doing this. Just because you get people now, are they going to give you what you need? This is all design, the design piece of research. And when we talk about creating a powerful study, these are all these pragmatics that we got to tie together into one piece and say, okay, I don't think I can make this study any stronger than it is. Every study is going to have weaknesses, but our job is to make it as strong as it possibly can be. Strong meaning you're going to get the data you need, the data is going to be usable, it's going to be valid and reliable, and there's a lot of design techniques that go into that. Thank you.
And Dr. Taylor, I'd add to that, there's a lot of communication that goes into that. And communicating through your IRB and your consent forms and your recruitment forms, why this study is important and why it's meaningful they participate. Also, as Dr. Gelstead said earlier, it's important to be clear about the time commitment that's involved and to communicate as efficiently as you can, because you need to respect their time. They are giving you a very valuable resource, and you want to make sure that you use that as efficiently as possible.
Great point, John. And again, we can dig into these design issues all night. But again, for those quantitative folks, think about the instrumentation that you're going to administer, you're going to put out there in SurveyMonkey. A lot of people refuse to do those based on the amount of time of administration. The two instruments that I had were for adolescents, but one would take over an hour and a half to administer to 8th grade, 6th, 7th, and 8th graders after lunch, to come in and fill out and sit still. So there's a lot of pragmatics to think about, okay? So we're just trying to, to get you thinking, get that brain churning, that even when we say research design alignment and you put those 4 components together that look alike, there is so much behind the scenes of planning and ensuring that this is a feasible study, if I'm making sense. And we work with you to help you think about and understand these things as you're progressing through your journey.
And to that, I would just add, think of all those surveys you've been asked to do about restaurants or an experience you've done.
Right.
And you're on like page 27 of the survey and they ask you the same question 3 times and you're like, I'm done. I'm out of here.
Exactly.
Think of
John.
your audience.
Mhm.
Think of their time. That's
Yeah.
probably one of the most important things to do as you're doing this design stage.
Exactly. And that raises the point. One of the kids, now when we were doing the surveys, he what he did was, it was about 8 pages, and he looked at all the pages and he was filling it out, and then I could see he was getting tired, and he just kind of flipped the page to see how many he had left to do. And he looked up at me and he just says, oh, Jesus Christ, and then I knew that all he was going to do was just start, scribbling responses, you see. And so, but again, that was a learning lesson for me because I'm a doctoral student and I'm learning how to do research. And that was something, that if I had to replicate that research again, I would think about those types of things, perhaps a shorter instrument or something different, not whatever the case may be, but just think of these pragmatics, okay? It's not just cut and dry that what you see on paper is everything that's needed to understand and execute. There's a lot of behind the scene things to think about, in a well-written proposal will talk about and address all of this. It's your blueprint. It's your game plan of how you're going to do this, the hows, the whats, the whens, the who's, the how many's, the what time am I going to do this, etc.
Awesome. This has been absolutely wonderful. We would like you all to complete a survey for us. So if you hold up your phone and grab that QR code, we would love to hear from you. In addition to that, we do want to remind you that we will have this particular presentation available on the YouTube site that we have for all of the PhD psychology webinars. We'll have that fairly soon in the coming week. So you'll be able to see this again and get all this wonderful information as well. And then I also saw a note from Dr. Agnew that if you would like a copy of these slides, go ahead and email him and he can share them with you. Would any of our presenters or Dr. Agnew like to share any final comments?
No, I'm fine. I'd just like to say thank you for your time and attendance here and good luck in your journey. And please reach out for us. We're here to help you. Thank you.
I will thank
Yes.
our presenters, Dr. Gelstad and Dr. Taylor and Dr. Morris. And thank you very much for sharing your experience. I'll also put in a plug for the Walden IRB. They are, generally speaking, fairly easy to work with. Some of the IRBs I've worked with over the years, I've wound up fighting with them through multiple review cycles over where to put a comma or which exact word should go right here or right there. And Dr. Gelstad and the Walden IRB never seem to go to that level of detail, which I greatly appreciate.
Thank you, Dr. Agnew. You know, we work really hard at having flexibility whenever possible. I didn't tell my funny story, but I had a really hard time with my undergraduate research in IRB way back when. So I've been in that position. And so we've got a great team. And I want to let everyone know, if you have follow-up questions, email irb@mail.waldenu.edu. That will get you the swiftest response. Or join IRB office hours, and all the times are posted on the IRB website.
Thank you. Have a great evening, everyone.